episode 151, IRONMAN Wisconsin with Taylor Rogers. Welcome to the pursuit of the perfect race. I'm Coach Terry Wilson, and with each episode, I bring stories of athletes to you that share their experiences at races in order for you to learn how to have your perfect race. We will hear stories from athletes of all ages, abilities, and races of all distances. So regardless of where you fit in, there's something in it for you. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Now let the pursuit begin. Today I'm talking with Taylor Rogers about his recent race at IRONMAN Wisconsin that took place on September 9th, 2018. He had a time of 12 hours, 12 minutes, and 32 seconds. The temperature on race day was 49 and rose to 69, and the water was around 72 degrees. Taylor's been doing triathlons for at least 3 years now and getting into Ironmans in the last 3 years as well. Welcome to the show, Taylor. I look forward to hearing about your race experience at IRONMAN Wisconsin.
Thanks, Terry. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, you're welcome, man. So what made you want to do this race? You've only done one Ironman before this, and that was Ironman Florida, and now you want to do this one, I guess, because it was closer?
Actually, I've done 3 before this.
Oh, 3, okay.
So I've done Florida twice and then Wisconsin as well.
Okay.
So 2 years ago, I did Wisconsin and Florida in 2016. 2015 with my first one being at Florida. I had a rough day at Wisconsin. I finished, but had some business to take care of on that course. I was 16:43 the first time I did Wisconsin.
Wow, what happened?
I was about 70 pounds heavier and not in shape like I thought I was. So
you weighed close to 260 pounds?
I weighed in there at 259 and topped out at about 265 before deciding I needed to change to keep doing the sport.
Wow. So you've lost some weight and you've gotten healthier. I mean, now you're sitting at about 195 at 6 feet tall. I mean, that's pretty awesome. That's a great accomplishment alone.
Yep, thank you.
So going into this race, what was your training like?
The bike is my background. It's what I do. It's what I have fun with. So I've worked a lot on the bike the last couple of years. The run, I started a little late this season, but didn't want to burn out last year. I started a little bit earlier, and by middle of the season, I had kind of burned out on it. So the run I started a couple months ago. I had the base from last year, but started building this year. The bike, through the off season, I did some light stuff. I didn't hit it as hard as I'd wanted to. But starting in about March, I was like 3-4 days a week on the bike, hard, outside most of the time, inside on the rainy days, cold days. Don't follow any set program. Just kind of go out and go hard and ride with a couple different groups and chase each other around all the time. So I've got a pretty good group of guys that push me or I try to push, and ended up all working out.
Nice. So do you have an ideal number of hours you want to hit a week? Do you have an ideal workout you want to hit in training to go into this race prepared? What is this like for you?
I'm pretty lax with my schedule. Being at the bike shop, this is our peak season, or we're just coming down off the peak of our season. So, there was a lot going on to where sometimes I got 5 hours in a week, but a lot of the times it was between 10 and 15 hours a week. Like I said, no real set program, just go out, ride hard. If I didn't feel good that day, just back off a little bit and move on to the next one.
Wow. So out of the 3 sports, which one's your weakest link?
I would now say probably the swim, just because I don't like doing it. I swim 1 or 2 times a week. Usually one kind of interval session and then one just set endurance session. The run I've been working on, again, pretty much the last few months after last year's base, and have improved that drastically. That was by far my weakest link. But now I would say the swim is a little bit weaker, but hopefully working on all those this off season, moving into next year.
Okay. Now, as far as your training going into this race is pretty relaxed. Did you want to go back to Wisconsin just for revenge and get a redemption race, or were you wanting to go back just because it was relatively close to you? What was this like in your decision-making process?
There were a couple things that led with that. One of our other team guys a couple years ago, unfortunately, didn't finish. So he said at some point he was going back. I wanted to go back, didn't plan on going back this early, but said at some point I will go back as a different athlete and race it again. Because while I finished that day, and I'm glad I finished, I felt like the course beat me up and totally wiped me out. I'm not going to say I wasn't happy because it was a finish, but it was one that I had hoped to be faster. But again, I was quite a bit heavier and not in the shape that I thought I was in now that I look back. So wanted to go back, race it again as a different athlete to see what I could actually do on the course too.
Okay.
And go back with him.
So if we take a look at your longest days of training, what would this look like for the swim, bike, and runs?
Swim, not very long. I did a couple 2,500 yard pool sessions in the weeks leading up. The bike I had done, I've done 7 or 8 centuries this year. Some of them being just outside of Detroit. There's not many hills here. So I'd go up to Traverse City area a couple times, did a race or a ride called the Michigan Mountain Mayhem, which was 105 miles of about 7,000 feet of climbing.
Nice.
So did that and then went up on vacation up there and rode part of that course again, as well as some other areas. So looked for some hills when possible. But mainly just putting in the miles, about, I think 7 or 8 over 100-mile rides. And then the runs, my longest I did a couple 12-milers and then an 18-miler a few weeks ago.
Oh, wow. So your longest run was just 18 miles.
Mm-hmm.
And was this all at once? Did you break it up? What was this like?
That was all at once. We have a local metro park that's like a 6-mile loop. So I ran 3 loops of that with some couple little stops for nutrition stuff because I don't like to carry anything when I run. So I had stuff packed at the car that way I could do a quick grab and keep going.
Wow. So for nutrition on race day, what were you wanting to use?
On the bike, I used Tailwind, used a couple heavy concentrated bottles, and then I'm partly fill my front hydration system and then top off with water to make the normal concentrate. And then when I got to the run, it was just grab whatever I felt at that aid station. Didn't really have any plans even running into the aid stations until someone yelled something that sounded good, and I grabbed it and moved on. So,
wow. Did they have nachos? Because nachos always sound good to me.
Yeah, that would have been perfect. When I heard the chicken broth for the first time, that had always been a savior at previous races. So that was definitely something that I grabbed a few times.
Wow. Now, whenever you think of your taper going into this race, what did this look like for you?
I'm not a huge taper guy lately. The last couple races I've done, being the half last season, and then Wisconsin this season so far. So like the days leading up, we got out to Wisconsin Thursday, and then Friday morning I got up and I went up and rode 20 miles of the bike course. I went out to Mount Horeb and rode down Garfoot, rode the 3 climbs, and then finished at Midtown. Probably went a little harder than I planned on. It was about an hour for that 20 miles. The watts were a little higher than what I was saying I was going to do, but I felt good. And then I ran 5K Friday, and then was going to run a 5K Saturday, but wasn't feeling it, so I slept in a little bit and kind of just kicked the legs up instead.
Okay. So if we take a look at your training, I know you've already said it's relaxed and whatnot, but what workouts did you that gave you the confidence to go into this race prepared to not just finish in 16:50 or 16:43, but to actually finish in a good time?
we've got some pretty strong bikers and triathletes in our area. So a lot of times, a lot of us ride at one of the metro parks, the one that I ran at. It's a 6-mile loop that you add a couple out and backs to get either a 9 or 11-mile loop. So on the bike was just chasing those guys all the time. Most amateurs or some guys even know Dan Stubleski, who was he's one of the top amateurs in Ironman distance. So the goal is to always chase him around whenever I can see him on the bike. And there's a bunch of other pretty quick triathletes that we always ride as a group. And I mean, we're pushing 23, 24, 25 miles an hour for 30, 40 miles chasing each other in a pace line. So once I started doing that, comparing back to 2 years ago at my 18 and 19 mile an hour rides, I knew I was quite a bit better from a shape standpoint. The run has always been something where I struggled to get going, struggled to get into a rhythm of. My brother has turned into a fairly avid runner, so he's helped me a lot lately, pushing me, keeping me going, getting me on certain days, doing certain things, and just watching the times come off compared to a couple years ago, especially. I mean, I went into the previous 3 Ironman pretty much knowing I was going to walk a marathon, knowing that come 112 miles on the bike, it was just going to hold a 17, 18 minute mile to get to the finish line. And I didn't want to do that anymore. So just decided to put in the work and change it all.
Wow. Now it seems like you put stock in volume of workouts over time versus 1 or 2 specific workouts for confidence. Does that sound right?
Yeah. I mean, I the group that I ride with, it's just, beat on each other anytime we can. We've got a couple guys that, I would ride with the same couple guys 2-3 times a week. A couple of those guys have coaches that are running a specific plan that I would just do their workout with, or just go ride and see them along the way kind of thing. I wouldn't say I had anything specific or set that I was using to benchmark along the way at all. No.
Okay. Now, you're training up to 15 hours a week. You have a full-time job. How do you manage life, work, and training balance?
Early mornings, sometimes late at night. The last few months especially, I've kind of kicked it in gear. At the end of May, I actually had a relationship change. Decided I was going to focus on myself at that point. So I'm down about 40 pounds since the end of May. And that's when I decided to kick the training in higher gear, and kick up the volume. That's when I started running more. So get up early in the morning, 5 o'clock workouts, rolling with my brother down to the Metro Park, on the bike to get a couple hours in before he went off to work. And then I would go to the shop and take the next 10, 12, 13 hours on some days. Some days it was a short day. And just get the work done whenever I could.
Okay.
And that's why the schedule wasn't always set. Just kind of whenever I could get certain things in was when it had to happen.
So you had a relationship change due to the training of Ironman?
I don't believe that was a cause of it. But I don't know. Someone else might.
Okay. We've seen the signs in all these races before. If you're still married, right, you didn't train hard enough.
Right. No, she was very supportive of everything that I did with Ironman and training and all that. Just other things kind of separated us, and it was for the better. It was the right thing to do, and it worked out for both of us. We're still on good terms and talk every once in a while. It just allowed me to focus on me and took it to the next level the last few months.
Okay. Now, when did you actually start traveling to your race?
So I worked full day last Wednesday. Got up Thursday morning. It was about, I think, 7 o'clock or so. Went out there with my parents and a coworker at the shop of mine. And my dad had a couple errands in the morning to run, and we left right from there. So about 9 o'clock on the road, 9:15, and got out to Madison. I think it was about 6:30, 7 o'clock that night. Just kind of putzed along, a couple stops on the way, and got there not as quick as we could, but didn't want to take too long. So I did get a run in Thursday night when I got there as well. So.
Okay. Now, did y'all get an Airbnb or a hotel? What does this look like?
I stayed at one of the hotels about a block away, the Best Western Premier Park. A couple years ago, we stayed like 7 or 8 blocks away, and saved a little bit of money, but the convenience, I don't think the convenience was worth it this time. Spending a little bit more and being right around the corner. I mean, we were right on the Capitol Square, which is cool. So.
Wow. Now, how much was this per night?
Like $300 rate per night plus all the fees they add on, which is like another $70-$80 a night. So
Jeez.
Probably about $400 a night for the weekend.
Was there a minimum night?
I think it was the 4 nights.
Wow. So you had to stay at least 4 nights.
Yeah.
Jeez.
But again, comparing to a couple of years ago, not having to drive to get into the village or and find parking, I think it was worth it, but some people may want to save the money, but it's all about the experience. I mean, you only do this once or twice a year, and yeah, it's an expensive weekend, but to be right there was definitely real cool.
Wow. Now, the next day you wake up on Friday, do you go down to the village on this day, or do you go Saturday? What does this look like?
Friday morning, we got up, went and registered. First thing when they opened, actually I ran in the morning, with my dad, cause we've got Ironman Florida in 9 weeks. So we got a short run in, and then, went and registered right at, I think it opened at 9 or 10. And then right from there, got some lunch and then went out, on the bike course. I wanted to go drive it. I was out here 4 weeks ago, looked at the course, rode the course 2 days back to back, but wanted to get out again and ride the Garfoot descent and all that. So got registered, went out on the course, did that, and then just relaxed for the rest of that day. That was Thursday.
This was Thursday?
Or Friday, sorry.
Okay.
Friday.
Now, whenever you go through Athlete Village to get all your stuff, how was this process for you?
Pretty relaxed. I mean, I just kind of walked through, check out. Like we were there before registration opened, so we were like 30th in line. We didn't have to wait a crazy amount of time at all. I like walking through, checking everything out. I know some of the vendors there, usually from being at the shop and talking to some of the guys. So a lot of times it's just catching up real quick with some people and checking out what new product are there. So it's cool to see. Noticed it was a little bit smaller of a village this year than some of the other races I've been at in a couple of years ago, but it was cool.
Okay. Now, as far as your time management leading up to the race, did you have a schedule that you wanted to kind of go off of, or did you just kind of have an idea of when things were going to happen? What was this like from a time management perspective?
Nothing real set. I'm pretty relaxed about everything. Just wanted to make sure I got the registration done, the bike check-in done. Wanted to be in bed relaxing fairly early Saturday night. Besides that, I didn't really have any set plans. So.
Okay. Did you have a set meal that you wanted to get the night before the race?
Usually the night before, I don't have any set meal. I usually avoid like the heavy steak or anything like that. I do occasionally get heartburn, so I avoid sauces like tomato sauce, anything like that the night before. So usually it's some type of chicken and either a type of potato. This time it ended up being like I think it was a club sandwich at one of the restaurants on the square, and some fries just to get some starch. Probably not the best fried food, but it all worked out. I have no complaints with it. So.
Do you get a beer?
No.
No beer?
I've avoided the beer lately. Just the heartburn, the bloating I feel of it sometimes. I actually didn't have a single beer this weekend, which is kind of disappointing, but wasn't in the mood for it pre-race, and post-race I was getting the text to go have one, and it just didn't sound right at the time. So no beer this weekend, which is, like I said, surprising.
Wow. Now, whenever you think of the day before the race, before you rack your bike and drop off your bags, what are you putting in all your bags?
I've kind of switched my mentality. I used to be, I want to make sure everything is there in case anything goes wrong, to where now I've been more of a minimalist lately. Special needs bags, I didn't do any run special needs. My bike special needs just had a couple spare tubes, a CO2, a spare used tire, because I wasn't going to get it back if I didn't grab it. Just in case I flatted or something on the first half of the course, I was safe for the second half of the course. Didn't even end up using that, didn't end up stopping for anything at all. My first transition had cycling shoes, socks, helmet, sunglasses, a washcloth just to wipe my face off with, and my feet. Some Tums in case I had heartburn coming out of the water, just in case. Besides that, I mean, it's just the necessary gear. Kind of less is more for me to use on race day. If I don't need it, don't have it. Spare set of contacts in case I lost my contacts coming out of the water. Run bag, just had a pair of fresh socks, my run shoes, my race belt, and a tube of base salt, which I dropped early on and didn't use. But luckily I grabbed one on the course. So that was it. Kind of only the things I needed, plus a dry rag to wipe my face and feet off between.
Okay. So I know Matt Miller's up there, and you're obviously familiar with the base products.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with what Matt is actually doing this year?
Yeah, I saw he's doing the 2 in 2 days,
Yes.
which is crazy.
Like, oh my gosh, I hope that I can get him on here to talk about those two races together and the logistics behind that, because that would be really interesting to hear about, especially like the fatigue that he's going to be carrying.
Right.
Is going to be tremendous. I mean, not compared to the Iron Cowboy, but that's on a different level. But like, this is a normal human being doing this.
Right.
And he's obviously trained. He's a stellar athlete, but he still is going to be carrying some fatigue. And he's not the only one doing it.
Yeah, there's like 5 of them here today.
I think there might be more. I'm not sure.
Yeah, there was a interview about him on Slow Twitch the other day. Yep. So I was reading on that yesterday too in the car ride on the way home. And that's crazy. I mean, I know how I feel a day after a race, and I couldn't imagine getting up at 5, 6 in the morning and doing it again. So that's crazy. Props to him on that.
Yeah.
And his group.
Yeah, that's just craziness. So for you, the night before the race, what time did you want to go to bed?
I was hoping to be in bed, feet up by 7, 8 o'clock. I know I wouldn't sleep by then, but I just wanted to be relaxed. I was actually going to try to limit my sleep the night before. That way I was tired going into that night, so I would fall asleep. But I skipped that last day morning run and slept in instead. So I got like 9 hours Friday night. So I wasn't extremely tired Saturday night, but I also wasn't too anxious either, which was a good feeling finally, because every other one I've gone into, I've been freaking out the night before. Knowing that I was a 16 plus hour, had to keep moving to finish. This one I was way more relaxed, way more laid back. Laid in bed for a couple hours, and I think I was sleeping by 10:30, which woke up in the morning and jumped right up and felt good and ready to go. So,
wow. So for people that don't know this course, what is the elevation gain on the bike and the run?
I've seen different reports. I mean, according to Ironman, it's like 4,300. According to my Garmin, the 7 now total times I've ridden it, between the slight change 2 years ago, adding Barlow in, and this one, every single course every single reading has come in over 5,500 according to my Garmin. So I haven't done like the Garmin correct, which you can do on the maps to see what exactly it is, but I think I would say it's just over 5,000 on the bike. And then I think my run said it was about 900 elevation.
So almost a flat run, almost.
Compared to what we've got here, pretty hilly, but flat for what it could be compared to the bike, yeah.
Okay. Now, the swim isn't downstream, it's in a lake.
Mm-hmm.
So now, is this water fresh water? Is this water kind of choppy? Is it murky? What is this water like for those that don't know?
This year, especially with all the flooding issues they had there, with moving the swim start, it was a little different. The water, for the most part, the day after was glass, of course. We were all commenting because we were standing in line at the finishers village at 7 a.m., right when the start would be. And you could, it looked like glass out there. There was not a ripple in the lake. It was pretty choppy on race morning. It's a pretty murky lake. You get kind of that smell and that taste if you accidentally take some water in. Not bad. Swam in way worse, but it's not crystal clear by any means. So
okay, that nice brown color, huh?
Yes, like you can see your hand when you first put it in the water, but your hand disappears a little bit as your hand goes out and down. So, but not too bad.
Wow. So you get up on race morning. What is your race plan before you leave the hotel?
I got up. I usually on race morning try to get my contacts and stuff in first thing. That way my eyes can settle in. For me, that's a big worry because if you take my contacts out, I'm pretty much blind. So I can't see my hand in front of my face if my contacts aren't in. So get that settled in, just get kind of woken up, put some music on. I'm sure my parents love that, but they could deal with it for the morning. Get in my kit. And we said pretty relaxed this time. I had a whole checklist the last couple times. This time I just had my stuff set out and just worked through the morning. Got up at 4:30. Transition opened at 5. I think I was out of my room and down at the breakfast at the hotel at 4:45, 4:50. So 15, 20 minutes up in the room. Then just get some light food in. I had a piece of toast with peanut butter on it and a banana. And then I just started sipping on Tailwind through the beginning of the swim start.
Okay. Now you get to transition. You're putting 105 PSI on your wheels, setting up everything as far as you can, but everything's really in bags. So you're really just making sure your bike's good. Everything is going good with it. Did you have any issues here?
Nope. On my training ride, I dropped my chain and wedged it in my frame pretty good. So that was something that I was very aware of on race day. So I got to transition, shifted through the gears a little bit, made sure everything was okay on the bike, set my nutrition bottles up, my Tailwind, pumped up the tires and walked away because I would have stood there and thinking about it for a half hour if I could have. So it's kind of get what I needed done, get the Garmin on, get my vector pedals calibrated, and just walk away from it. Everything's set. It's good to go. So.
Wow. Now, whenever you think of the time between you leaving transition to the getting to the swim start, you have about an hour and some change before you actually have to be in the water. What are you doing in this time frame?
Just went and sat against a wall and put my normal workout playlist on my headphones and just kind of got focused and got ready. This is where I kind of went into my, I guess I would say, own little world with it. Funny, my mom actually took a few pictures of me, sitting with my hands around my face, just looking down, my hat pulled down over my face, because this time I wanted to be ready. I was going through my plan in my head, what I wanted to keep from a power standpoint on the bike, my plan on the run, if things fell apart, when things fell apart, how to pull it back together, just going through the scenarios in my head while listening to some music and trying to stay relaxed.
Okay. Now, for those that don't know this race particularly, They changed a little bit of the dynamics of the course before the race.
Yeah, the swim was moved about 50 yards down the path a little bit. And then the first few miles of the bike were changed. Actually, and the first mile or so of the run because of construction. Nothing like they kept saying in the athletes meeting, they were just telling everybody that if you hadn't raced the course before, it would seem like there was no change. There was no issues or anything. Just slight little detours. The boat launch was flooded still for the swim. And then, the underground little pathway that they take you on the bike was flooded. So they had to reroute that a little bit. And then for the run, instead of running out the east side of the transition, there's construction downtown. So they had you run through transition, through all the bikes. And that was technically considered part of the run course. I found out because my Garmin file was a little bit short. And I think that was considered actually the course, even though you were still running in transition. And then they ran you out the west side and then kind of weaved you back across onto the normal run course. So little changes, but nothing drastic.
Okay. Now, whenever you think of the distance of this race, was it 140.6 or was it a little shy?
I think it was pretty close. The bike change, I'm not sure if it shortened anything at all because they still took you, I think it was at like mile 3, you were on the exact bike course again. It may have cut a little bit off. My Garmin was reading a little bit short on the bike course, but I think that was just pickup issues on the course at some point. But it was pretty close.
Okay. So you're getting in your wetsuit, all this fun stuff, getting ready to get into the water. Where are you seeing yourself?
I was hoping to swim under an hour 30. So I see to myself right at the back of the 1 hour 20, hour 30 group. Kind of right on the cusp of that 1:30 swim was the goal.
Okay. Now, you're lining up, the pros go off, and then the age groupers are about to... Hey, everybody, I just want to say thank you for listening to the podcast, and I just want to let you know that I've enjoyed having so many people on this show, and I couldn't really do it without your support. Thank you so much for tuning in, listening, and being a part of what I'm doing. If you would, take a few moments to leave me a review over on iTunes. It would help me out tremendously, and enjoy the show. Okay. Now, you're lining up, the pros go off, and then the age groupers are about to get into the water. What is your mindset at this point?
Pretty relaxed. The swim is something where like I said, I don't focus on it too much. I was still walking down the path when the pros went off, so I wasn't even in the seating yet. Had my wetsuit still around my waist at that point, so I kind of got wherein I was seated at that 120, 130 mark, and that's when I pulled the wetsuit up and zipped up the back of it, and then decided to put the cap on. Didn't get wet before the race at all. First time I started was right when I crossed that mat to go in. So,
wow. Now, whenever you get into the water, how does the swim go for you?
Usually I take the first, like I said, I don't know exactly how long, the first 10, 15 minutes, just kind of pace myself, get warmed up, get loosened up. And then it's just keep moving in the water. I don't look at my watch at all. I didn't look at a single time. I don't follow heart rate in the water. It was just keep swimming because then you'll get to the bike, which is what you want to do. So.
Okay. Did you get hit or beat up in the swim at all? I know it was a little rough, right?
It was a little choppy on the back stretch. And being the single loop, that back stretch seems like it takes forever. Little chop in the water. Occasionally I would get T-boned by someone else, which is interesting because looking back on my swim file, I spot quite a bit. That way I don't swim extra because swim's not my strong suit. So I swam a pretty straight line according to the file, which is good. I didn't swim a bunch extra. But it was a little physical out there, even with the self-seating, rolling start. It was more physical there than it was at the half I did last year. I pretty much had my own space the entire time last year. This one was more similar to the mass start of 2 years ago in Wisconsin, from a physicality standpoint.
Wow. So from what I know of this swim course, you kind of go out a little bit, you take a right, you go probably, 500 meters or so, then you take a left turn, and then that's about a 200-meter stretch, and then the back stretch that you're talking about is, about 1,800 meters, and then you take a left, and then you kind of curve into the transition area?
Yeah, so when you get in the water, it used to be the mass start where they had you line up at the front. There's like a boat ramp or something out in the water, a couple hundred yards. They usually had you line up across the front of that, and then it was the mass start. This time they had you walk down, and again, it was about 50 yards to the west of where it was usually. Actually, it would have been 50 yards to the east, I believe. So you had a little different spot. There was about a foot drop off when you stepped down into the water. So they had people yelling that out. You got in the water and they just turned you right along the terrace, and you swim almost all the way to, there's like a bridge on the far side. I think it was a little bit longer now. And then, yeah, that back stretch is it's about a 200 yard jog over to that. And then it's just a straight shot all the way down. Stopped a couple times, not any particular time, just to stop and see where I was and adjust the goggles a little bit and just kind of keep into a rhythm when possible. So, seems like a long time on that back stretch. And that's why I didn't know what I had swam at all. I thought I was out there longer than I was, which is a good thing, I guess. So.
Okay. Now, you didn't have any issues on the swim as far as your goggles getting kicked off, or you have any cramps or GI issues or anything like this in the swim, right?
Nope. I swim kind of protecting myself. I over-exaggerate the stretch with my hands, keep my hands out, kind of feeling around before I pull, to make sure that I'm not swimming up into somebody, make sure no one's coming across me before I guess, leave my upper body exposed on kind of the roll. So I slow down the swim stroke on race day and kind of protect it. So I didn't have any issues there. No stomach issues, no cramping issues. Nothing really until getting out of the water when I cut my foot open.
You got your foot open?
Yeah. Right underneath the ball of my foot on my right foot. So it made it interesting later in the race, but.
Okay. So let's go ahead and talk about that. What happened here?
I think it was when I was stepping up that little drop off, because I kind of put my foot down, and when I stepped down at getting into the water, you could clearly feel like the foot drop off. It was a ledge. By the time I was getting out of the water, you could tell people had been sliding back down it. So it was more of a little ramp. And they had little gates in the water that you kind of grab and pull yourself up on, and people helping up. I stepped up onto it and ended up with my foot sliding right back down it. And I think that's when it happened. A pretty little cut. Like I said, not a big cut, but right where you put all the pressure when you run, right on the ball of the foot. And I didn't even realize it until I got into T1. So running up the helix, didn't have any pressure, didn't feel anything. And then went to put my sock on in T1 and noticed the blood on my hand from it.
Wow. So this obviously didn't hurt because you weren't in pain at this point. But whenever you started seeing blood, what was your impression of this? Did you think your day was done? Did you know what was going on? Did you have enough Band-Aids or anything to bandage this up? What was your thought process?
Nothing to bandage it up. Because I went to pull my sock on and had blood on the back of my hand. So I took the sock off a little bit, used a rag and kind of wiped it because I had a dry rag in T1. And just thought, man, I hope this doesn't hurt me on the bike, which I didn't think it would because of the stiff cycling shoe. But I immediately started thinking about the run and what it was going to do pushing off every time. But I didn't know. I mean, it's probably a inch long cut right where the big toe and the ball of my foot meet. So right when you push off where it stretches that skin tight. So that made it fun. We'll call it fun, I guess.
I see what you did there.
But nothing I didn't figure I could work through. Just had to change up a little bit. It was kind of really only the one tweak to my race plan all day I had to kind of adjust on. So
okay, so
just another thing thrown at you.
Yeah, so being that you actually had this happen to you, how did you adjust your plan accordingly? Did you reduce your watts, reduce your pace a little bit? What was this like for you?
So the bike, I didn't notice it at all. I pulled my shock off in T2 and had some blood on my hand again, and it was still open and wet from sweat and the water, getting out of the water. And the run, I ran my first few miles like I planned. Was hoping to hold that pace a little bit longer. But then about mile 5, it started to hurt. And my right foot was, I've been battling some foot pain the last few weeks on it. Of course, I was in a sports ankle brace the couple weeks leading up. Backed off the running a little bit the couple weeks leading up. And of course, this happened on my right foot again. So I was adjusting how I was running. I was landing on the outside of my foot a little bit more, that way to take the pressure off that area, which then triggered the foot pain to come back pretty early on, which put me in a dark place for a little bit because I thought, oh man, this is going to be a long day again. But right after the turnaround on the first loop to go back on the second loop, so just after the half marathon point, I kind of found how to land to where the pressure was more right in the middle of my foot. And I just turned it into a run walk where I'd run until the outside of my foot hurt, and then I'd walk for a little bit. And then when it felt okay, would start running again, instead of more of a pure run at a slower pace. So it was really, like I said, the only change I had to make to what I was trying to do all day. Ended up working out still.
Okay. Now, whenever you get on the bike, how does the first few miles of the bike ride go for you?
I always have to tell myself to back off coming out on the bike. Being that the bike is my strong suit, I was watching my power very close. That's what everybody was telling me. My dad the morning of, my brother when I was on the phone with him the night before, was don't go on the bike. Just hold back a little bit, relax. Luckily, this course, the first few miles, especially with a little bit of the change, are on like a bike path. So you had to be careful. There was actually a couple crashes in the first few miles that I passed by.
Is that before the bridge or after the bridge?
So that's, you come down the helix and you're on the loop around the lake, like a paved path. And instead of taking you under an underpass under one of the main roads, they kept you on that 6-foot wide bike path. And you were on that for, I think it was like 2-3 miles. And then they weaved you out of town a little bit of a different way, than normal. So you cross that little bridge at the end of the lake where you almost swim to. And then there's some railroad tracks you have to cross. And like right there was a, not sure if it was a man or a woman laying on the side. They had stabilizers like on their neck. I think they maybe had gone down going across the railroad tracks. And that, for me, just said, okay, back off right now. This is going to get technical. It's going to be tricky getting out of town. So it helped me keep my power down because I couldn't go. I had to kind of ease into the bike and relax for a little while.
Okay. So what is your FTP as far as your watts go?
I haven't tested in the last few months, I would say, but over the winter, I was right at like 295, 300. I think 298 was what I had tested at. I'm stronger now than I was then even, but I haven't done a formal FTP test. I do structured workouts over the winter when I'm on a trainer. During the summer, it's just go out and ride. So I don't have any testing. I watch my watts when I'm out there. But I don't really do anything during the summer. So I hadn't tested, recently, but I was basing my numbers on around like a 300 FTP.
Okay. So what were you wanting to hit in the race as far as your watts? Were you wanting to go off of a certain average, a 3 to 10 second average, a real time power number? What are you going off of?
So on my computer, I have my 3-second average and then my overall average showing. I wanted to, the biker in me wanted to be around 230. The smart person in me said be around 220. And I was actually around 200. So I kept it lower than I had planned. I think the readings were a little bit low because I didn't recalibrate running out of T1. I calibrated in the morning when it was colder and then didn't recalibrate the power meter. So I think they were a little higher than shown because I felt like I was pushing a little harder than 200 for the most part. At one point at the end of the first loop, my average at mile 56 or so, my average was like 210. And then overall at the end was just under 200. My goal was to keep it under 220. So
now, do you think the temperature impacts the power reading?
Yeah, the on most power meters, they'll tell you to calibrate as soon as you can, like prior to riding, because the strain gauges respond different depending on the temperature. So I usually calibrate right as I'm coming out of T2 or T1, sorry. But I went to calibrate it because the bike, when I was rolling, it was giving me error messages because it was probably detecting
Other people.
like a power reading because the bike was rolling. So I just left it as it was and just started riding. And on the bike about 10, 15 miles in, I said, okay, you're not going to be able to hold 220 all day and run. And that's when I kind of backed off and started to bring it back down more around 200.
Okay. Now, how are the how are the road qualities here?
They're rough roads. I mean, I've been races where it's smooth pavement. You got to be careful on these courses. There's some spots that are nicely paved, but it's kind of like the chip seal vibration with some cracks and potholes, and you got to be aware, which is another thing for on the bike, the fit position. You got to be able to look further up the road for longer, as opposed to being able to just drop your head down and not have to pay attention quite as much. So it's just another thing to focus on and be careful with.
Okay, now we know that there's some hills here on the course. How did you want to attack the hills from a data perspective or your strategy perspective?
Being that the bike is my strong suit, I normally hammer up the hills as hard as I can. But on the race day, I was trying to keep it under, I guess I would say around 400 going up the hills. Cause I mean, I'm not as big as I was, but I'm still a bigger guy for a triathlete. So I still have to put some power down to get up the hills or else I'd be walking. But I used to spike it and then settle in. And this time I was just trying to kind of build and get into first gear really quick and just spin as much as possible. No need to hammer out, especially when you got to do the loop twice. So,
right. Now, whenever you think of the aid stations on this course, were they stocked well? Did you have enough time to get rid of what you needed to? Crowded? What were the aid stations like?
They're great. I pretty much only took water from them though. And it was simple for me because I had everything I needed on the bike from a nutrition standpoint. I had all the tailwinds, enough for I was planning for 6 hours, planning for like a 19 mile an hour average. I would have been a little bit short on calories. And even with I think it was 533 on the bike, I still ended up taking a bottle of Gatorade on the stick back in after the 2 loops, just to make sure I got the calories I needed. I started getting a little bit of cramping at the end, so I started popping some base salt a little quicker. But for the most part, it was just water. I don't do much solid food at all during race, especially on the bike. All liquid nutrition, and I think I took like 1 gel on the bike, just a just in case gel. So
was that towards the end?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, I think it was at mile 95 or something like that, right before I got back to the stick.
Okay. Now, whenever you think of the bike ride, I haven't done this course before, and you're the first one in this series. Paint the picture of what this course looks like.
The way I've described, like when people ask me how the course is, it's a lot of short, punchy, kind of relentless climbs. There's nothing long like in Lake Placid or Mont Tremblant, but it's just hills over and over and over again. There's a lot of times there's no real rhythm. I hit, according to my Garmin, over 50 on the bike going down. And that was something I knew I was just going to open up as much as possible because the uphills are real short, punchy climbs. You're coming down a hill at 45 miles an hour and you think, man, I'll be able to coast all the way up the top. And you get a third of the way up the hill and you're going 7 miles an hour. So it's just that over and over again. There's a couple sections where I knew I would have to get as much nutrition in as possible. Hopefully not playing catch up, but making sure, because it's hard to get in some nutrition on some parts of that course because you're either climbing at 5, 6, 7 miles an hour, or you're descending on a couple technical descents at 40, 45, 50. So it can be tricky to get the nutrition in because of how up and down the course is. If there's no real steady rhythm to anything.
Okay. Now with this course, were the aid stations appropriately timed?
Yes. I think they were great to where they put them. A couple years ago when I did the course, it was a little different. And there was one really sketchy aid station. You came down a hill at like 35 miles an hour through an intersection, and the aid station was right there on the right side. But because of this going back to the old course, there wasn't anything like that. There were a couple that were kind of right on the crest of a couple climbs, but they weren't crazy descents off of them. So there was no real tricky aid stations to get into, it was good.
Nice. So what were the views like on this bike ride?
A lot of cornfields, a lot of cows. It's kind of cool. You get to the top of some of the climbs and you can see what just looks like rolling farmland for miles. And you can smell it too, which is fun in some of those parts. Again, everything is fun on race day. But it's a nice course. I mean, you stop on training days, you stop and take pictures a couple times. I think on our training rides, I took like 20 pictures out on the course of just the view of it. Nothing extreme, just kind of rolling Wisconsin.
Okay. Now, towards the later portion of the bike ride, miles 80, 90 through 100, were you having any issues mentally?
I had a couple little battles, nothing like I had in the past. I think I started to get the first twitch of a cramp at about this would have been like mile 88. So I took a little salt earlier than I planned on. That's right before I grabbed the bottle of Gatorade. And after 4 or 5 minutes, it was gone. Got back to the stick to head into town. I did drop my chain at mile 96 or so. But luckily it wasn't like on the training ride where I had to get off the bike and pry on it for 5 minutes, about 20 seconds, and I had it back on and was going again.
So you did have to stop?
I stopped, got off, but it was just pulling the chain back up onto the ring. Nothing was stuck anywhere. I've been battling a little adjustments with the bike on getting the chain. It gets actually wedged in between the inside chain ring and the frame, and you've got to just kind of pry on it. I caught it before I learned how to catch it to keep it from happening. So as soon as I felt it drop off, I just stopped pedaling and coasted to a stop and just had to push the rear derailleur forward to pull the chain back on. Took 10 seconds, stretched out since I was standing off the bike. Might as well stretch for a second. And got back in, and the same 6 or 7 people that we were all yo-yoing back and forth depending on who was climbing and who was descending, and I was kind of right back where I was. I didn't really lose any time with it. But it played a little mental game where may have said a couple swear words at myself and mad that I didn't catch it. But once I settled back in and realized that I'd only lost 10 or 15 seconds from what it would have been, I was fine. So no real challenges other than that little hiccup. But.
Okay. Now, as far as the rest of the bike goes, did you see a lot of flats, mechanicals, or other wrecks?
Saw some wrecks. Actually, one of our local athletes here went down at somewhere around the base of Midtown before the last long climb on the loop. Ended his day, unfortunately.
Really?
Yeah, he snapped his front fork actually on his bike. So I'm sure I'll get into the shop today and it'll be there. There were a number of flats and probably, I think I saw maybe 7 or 8 other crashes out there. Bikes on the side of the road, people getting into the one. I saw an Everyman Jack guy getting into one of the cars. I've talked with a couple friends that know him. He wiped out with another rider, more than usual. I think it's because of the technical descents on some of the hills. But I kind of expected them. You hate to see it, but it happens.
Right.
So
now, the last mile or two before the bike is over, are you doing anything to start preparing to start running?
Not really, other than just backing off and taking it easy. Which again, on this course, they kind of forced you to. They claimed it was a no passing zone, but there weren't any signs or anything on it because you were back on that real narrow bike path. So there was a group of about 5 of us that were spread out over 50 yards or so. At the last 3 miles, we just kind of easy pedaled it in. And then of course you get to ride up the helix and push the power back up again. But I just focused. I think my average watts over a 5.5 hour ride dropped by 3 in the last 3 miles. Just real easy spin, more higher cadence just to spin the legs out going into the run.
Okay. As far as the bike ride goes, is there anything you'd want to tell someone to be aware of that hasn't done this course before?
Pre-ride it. That would be my advice, because of how technical some of the descents are. This last year, I got into the Quintana Roo PR6 disc, so I got disc brakes on the tri-bike, which are awesome, and allowed me to, again, go late into a lot of the descents on the brakes. I would definitely advise pre-riding it. Both times I've done this course, I went out a month and a half beforehand, and ridden the entire loop twice each day. So I've done almost the full course 6 or 7 times now. So it was cool today or cool this weekend. I knew the course like the back of my hand. So I knew where the turns were. I knew where some of the technical descents are, but it's definitely a windy, lots of turns. They didn't this weekend have hay bales set up, but I've seen in the last race where they actually had hay bales set up at the bottom of some of the hills because it's a 90-degree turn at the bottom of the hill that you're going 45 on. So just pre-ride it. It's a technical course.
Wow. So you get to T2. How does T2 go for you?
So handed my bike off, grabbed my computer, stopped it because that's the most important thing is make sure the Garmin file's right. Ran into the changing room. First thing I wanted to check out was see kind of how my foot was, knowing that the run was going to be what the battle was. So I changed socks completely. I got into put my calf sleeves on. I've been running in calf sleeves lately and just felt that I've run better and felt better, whether it's a placebo effect or whether it actually is something that works. Just less movement going on in the lower leg, which I used to get shin splints. I don't get those anymore. Used to get a tight Achilles. Haven't had that feeling almost to the point where my toes would go numb. Haven't gotten any of that since I've been using them. And took a couple minutes, took a couple breaths, had a couple glasses of water, and then just started going. Didn't do anything crazy. I think I popped a couple more Tums just to make sure the heartburn didn't show up on the run, and went from there.
Nice. So you get out on the run. What is the first mile of the run like for you? What does this look like? What does this feel like? What are the views? What does this look like?
Again, this one was a little different with you run right back through transition. So first thing I got to see was that my bike was hanging there. No one had just pitched my bike to the side. And then you get out on the course and you're right in downtown. So, you run right around the Capitol building in the first mile. I was shooting to run around 10-minute miles for the first however long I could hold it. I think I ran in the 9s the first 4 miles or so. Usually I come out screaming hot on it, and just wanted to make sure I didn't come out running 8s or anything, because I knew that would pay, or I would pay for it later on. Just pace it, be easy. There's a little bit of a gradual climb coming up out of transition. I didn't walk it, but I backed off that little bit. It was like 100 yards probably, and just went easy.
Okay. Now, the first mile, how was the spectator support here?
The spectator support on the run course is awesome. The whole thing. It's out on the bike course too, which is crazy. You think you're in the Tour de France for a couple of the climbs. The run course, the first, I would say, half mile, there weren't a bunch of people because you weren't on the square yet. You weren't in the capital type thing. But as soon as you got up that first little gradual climb and came around the corner, there were people everywhere, which was cool.
Wow. Now, whenever you start getting to the little later portions of the run, you mentioned earlier that about mile 5 to 10, you had hit a dark place here. What happened?
That's when my foot started to hurt, because I was running. I'm pretty much a midfoot kind of. I don't run on the inside or outside of the foot. I land kind of square up more towards the ball of my foot. To avoid the cut on the inside of the right foot, was landing on the outside. And it's funny, one of my parents took a picture and you can see that I'm rolling on the outside of my shoe big time. And by mile 5 or 6 is when the outside of my foot started to hurt, right in that pain that I had the last couple weeks. And that's when it turned into like great, now I'm going to have to walk the last 10, 12, 15 miles because of this. So I just kind of started adjusting how I was running. I walked, you can see my splits slow down quite a bit around mile, I think it's like 8 or 9 for a couple miles. And then right at about just after the turnaround to go back out on the second loop is when I learned how to land with what was going on with my foot. And that's when I settled in right back around like that 11 and a half, 12-minute miles again, which was my goal.
Wow. So mentally, this was the hardest portion of the run for you, this miles 5 to 10-ish?
Yeah, I would say 5 to about 13, till about the turnaround when I kind of figured it all out, how to make the right foot specifically work with what was going on.
So what were you doing as far as negative self-talk? How did you get through this?
I saw a couple people that I knew on the course, luckily, at that point, which kind of kept me going. I just took it basically one aid station at a time. The goal was just to get to the next aid station, get some potato chips, some soda, a little bit of Gatorade. I usually, by the time I get to the run, I'm sick of sports nutrition, so I avoid the Gatorades and the goos and all that if possible. And so it just became a mental battle that I was here to beat my previous time by a lot. And then I just kept playing that over in my head. And I knew if I slowed down to a walk, it wouldn't be as much as I'd wanted to. So I just kept going, just kept pushing through it. Like I said, and then the turnaround to go out to mile 13 at the second half is where I kind of figured it out. And then I saw my parents at mile like 19, and my dad ran with me for like 10 steps. And that's when I really kicked it back in gear, because I actually, at one point, my goal going into this race was under 13 hours. That would have been over 3.5 hour savings from the last time I raced this course. And I had miscalculated in my head during that dark time and was like, man, now I'm just shooting for under 14 hours. And at the turnaround to go out on the second loop, I looked at my watch and it was 5 o'clock. And I was like, all right, 5 o'clock, that gives me 3 hours to be under 13, not under 14. Somewhere I had lost an hour. And I actually asked one of the guys at the aid station, I was like, what time is on your watch? He's like, oh, it's 5:08. And I was like, no way. And that's when I got that second wind right then and there. And that's when my splits actually started to pick back up again, as I got back into that rhythm. So in that dark place, I miscalculated something and lost an hour somewhere. And then when I realized I really was still on the pace that I was trying for, it gave me that second wind and it took me out of the dark place, I guess I could say.
Wow. So you went into a dark place, you miscalculated something, and then because you miscalculated, it kept leading to a spiraling downward slope, and then you're like, a little bit later, okay, well, let me just do the math again. You do the math again, and then you're like, oh, wow, miscalculated. Well, let me verify this. You verify it, and then you're like, oh, okay, I'm good. So let's just keep going. Then you get your second.
Exactly. Yes. Wow. Yeah, it was one of those where once I realized I still had a shot at my goal, my new goal was make sure that happened. Make sure that I got there. And at I think it was like 5:08, the time on like the actual clock, I had 11 miles left. I was like, okay, that gives me 3 hours. That means I can run like a 16-minute mile and still be under 13.
Right, a 16-minute mile.
Yes, I had to maintain a 16-minute mile and still be under 13. And that's when I changed actually the screen on my watch from current pace, time, distance, all that to single miles, like your lap screen. And I just made sure every single one of those miles was under like a 13 or 12-minute mile, because every time I did that, I knew it was 3-4 minutes in the bank on it, on that 13-hour goal. So, wow. And that's what helped pull me back into the right state of mind for that.
Man, so did you have any GI issues on the run?
Little bit on some of the aid stations, and that's where I kind of worked in the walk run strategy to go with my foot hurting. I would kind of plan it to where most people will walk the aid station, then start to run after. I would run through the first part of the aid station until I got to whether it be the chips or the cola or the chicken broth. I would take that. I would walk to the last trash chance, throw my cup or whatever, and then I would walk like another minute. That way I could let everything get in, settle in a little bit, and then I would run to the next aid station. And that just became my strategy, because I tried running out of the aid stations a couple times right away, and it wasn't major GI issues, but I could start to feel it in my stomach. Like the liquids were sloshing around or something going on in there. So after I would eat or drink, I would give it a little bit of time before I started running again.
Wow. So on the run course, what was the funniest thing that you saw?
There were some people wearing some interesting outfits, athletes participating, which were fun. There was a guy wearing a Speedo that looked like jean shorts, and then he had a tri-top on. And I was running behind him at one point, and someone at an aid station yelled, there must have been a lady behind me, like, how are you not running up to that? And how are you not chasing that? So I immediately started walking and let him get away from me a little bit. There were some funny signs that kind of take your mind off of it every once in a while. I don't know who I think it was Veronica is, but her support crew probably had 100 signs out between the bike course and the run course. So it was always entertaining to see what the next sign was going to be for her. Besides that, I mean, it was just watching all the spectators. You get up on State Street, which is like the bar street, and it's packed. People everywhere. All the bars have like outside seating areas set up. It's like you feel like you're in the middle of like a pro race, because there's thousands of people out on the run course, which was really cool.
Wow. Now, for Sherpas that are going to come to this race and help support their athletes, aside from buying 100, 200 signs and putting them all over the course, how can Sherpas do really good jobs here at this course? Where do they need to be? What should they do? What do they need to be aware of?
So the bike course is kind of cool. They do a shuttle from transition out to Verona, which is the end of the first loop. They have like a festival that goes on. And so my parents got on the shuttle once I came out of T1, and they took the shuttle out to Verona. So I got to see them at mile 50 on the bike or so. It's right at one of the aid stations. And then they drop all the spectators off in the parking lot and walk out on the field right onto the side of the road. So I saw them out on the bike. The run is real cool because it kind of winds back. The course winds back on itself a couple times. So my mom and I sat down and we actually wrote down what mile markers and how much time between those markers they had to get from certain points. So they went in between the turnaround point for the marathon, so just right by the finish line, to State Street, which is about probably half a mile, 3/4 of a mile away, but that's mile. So you got one coming out of transition. It's mile 6. It's like the turnaround to go back out on the second half of the first loop. Then they were back at transition again, or the finish line for the end of the first loop. And then at mile 19 again, I saw them on State Street, and then they saw me at the finish line. So it was easy for them. They had plenty of time to get back and forth to those two spots. And it was about an hour to an hour and 20 minutes from me to get from spot to spot. So it gave them plenty of time.
Wow, so it seems like this is a really Sherpa-friendly course.
Yes, and you could even, there's a couple other spots on the run course where you could go if you really wanted to cut it. Like if you wanted to see the athlete every 45 minutes, you could even do that more if you wanted to. The course, like I said, winds back on itself a couple times, which is cool.
Wow. Now the hills on this course, there's 900 feet of gain or so. How are these hills for you? Or was it just kind of fall flats? What does this look like?
No, there's a couple rollers. When you're in downtown, for the most part, it's flat. You get out, and cool thing about this course is you get to run into the University of Wisconsin football field, Camp Randall. So you run through the parking lot, you run down the chute, and then you do a lap around the field on both loops. So right along the outside of the stadium, there's a little rolling hill. And then Observatory Hill on the run course is a long, fairly steep hill, long being half mile probably. And that was one where I ran the flat to it and knew I was just going to walk up the hill. It's the one where you got to put a forward lean in your walk to kind of get up it kind of thing.
Oh, wow.
And it goes up, it flattens off, and then it kicks back up again. And then it's a steep downhill down the backside of it. So that a lot of people like to run that, and I just took it easy. I didn't want to fire the quads coming down the backside of it either. So I knew from racing this beforehand that part of the run course was definitely a walk section. Kind of walk up the first part of the hill, run the little flat spot, walk up the second part of the hill, and then take it real easy getting down the backside of it, because then the next couple miles were fairly flat again. So I could kind of kick back into gear at that point. It's mainly that one hill that you do twice, and then there's a couple little rollers. I mean, nothing drastic, but besides that one.
Okay. Now, with this course, you're approaching the finish line at mile 26, obviously, but the miles before that, 24 and 25, where are you at mentally?
Today I was in a good place, or Sunday I was in a good place compared to previous times. 2 years ago when I did it, I was in zombie walk mode. I was just kind of stumbling along. This time I still hit the last couple aid stations. I walked those just to make sure I didn't get to the finish line and cramp while I'm trying to run down the finish chute or anything like that. Ditched my little tube of base salt, my Tums, anything I was carrying on me, I threw away at the last aid station. Just kind of kept that run walk mentality. I walked a couple times in the last couple miles. The last, I would say, 3/4 of a mile brings you back up State Street, and then you run around the Capitol Square, and then you turn and go down the finisher's chute. So I got to the Capitol Square, and there's an aid station right on it. So I walked that aid station. I had a third of a mile left, and I still walked the aid station. I said, just make sure you're good to go this last third of a mile. Made the couple turns, went through where the run special needs is, going back the other way, which is 50 yards from the finish line. I had to look at my Garmin to make sure I was at 26 miles, because I've never finished in the daylight, to make sure that I was good to go. Came around that final corner, and the finisher's chute was 100 yards there. I stopped My mom, my dad, and Joe, the coworker I went with, he unfortunately had an issue in the swim, so he wasn't able to keep going. They were standing there on the sidelines. I gave them a hug and handed off my glasses because I wanted a picture without sunglasses on finally, and took the last 50 yards and soaked it all in and ran through the finish line.
Wow. How was this experience for you?
Was kind of in shock. Like I said, even at mile 26, I had to look at my Garmin a few times to make sure I didn't have another loop to go, which was a good feeling. And I beat really all 3 time goals that I had set for myself, even with kind of what had happened with mainly, really the only issue was my cutting my foot, which is what I had to adjust on. So I think it's still kind of setting in that I shaved 4 hours off of a PR and 4.5 hours off of that course from the last time I did it. But it's a good feeling. It was great.
Wow. So how was the finish line experience for you?
It was awesome. I just soaked it in. Wasn't going to say took my time, but I gave high fives as I was coming down the finish chute. Said stopped to see my parents and give them a hug. Turned around to make sure that nobody was running up behind me, because if they were, I was going to let them go. And just take that time in the finisher chute to be the one in the focus of the chute, which is awesome.
Wow. So as you cross the finish line, how was this feeling for you?
Physically, I felt great still. They were actually like slowing me down because I just kept walking, and they're like, "No, stop. You're good. You're done." So I know I'm fine. And from an emotional, I didn't really get emotional. Just unbelievable, I guess. Still, like I said, I still don't think it's really fully set in that I hit what I wanted to. I pretty much executed my day as planned, which has never happened. Usually I fall apart on the run. Even in my half Ironman last year, I fell apart on the run. So getting through everything I had set and fighting through the little hiccups along the way, it was just an overall great feeling. And then to have my parents there was awesome.
Wow. So after the finish line, what'd you do next?
Stood around for a little bit, did the finisher chute, went back to the hotel. My dad went and grabbed my stuff from my transition, grabbed my bike for me, went back to the room, showered, cleaned up, laid down in bed for probably half hour, and then got back up and got ready and went back out and cheered on the last probably almost 2 hours. We were out there, because I'd never seen it from that side of the fence. I'd always been involved in the last hour, 15, half hour kind of thing, 15 minutes. So, just got to go back and take it all in, and, got the picture with Mike Riley, which was awesome while he was killing time, waiting for people to come in. He was walking around dancing and partying. And, so it was cool to talk to him for a second and get a picture with him. And we cheered right through the final finisher of the night. So,
wow. So, as far as your recovery process, what did this look like for you?
Nothing extreme. I'm going to kick my feet up for the next week or so. I sold my house about 2 weeks before Wisconsin, so I moved out of a house in the weeks leading up to it. And I close on a condo Friday, so I'll be moving into a condo in the next week or so. So that is going to be my excuse to not work out for the next week or two. And then I've got a half marathon in October, and then Ironman Florida in November. So short recovery. I'll get some, probably won't run because of the foot. I'll let the cut heal up. That way I'm not running awkward and hurting anything more. Maybe get back on the bike towards the end of the week or this weekend just for a short ride to help spin the legs out. And then get back at it in the next week and a half or so.
Wow. Now, looking back on it, how well prepared for this race do you feel like you were?
By far the most prepared that I've ever been. I mean, from a weight loss standpoint and a physical fitness standpoint, by far. Obviously, everybody questions whether they're as fit as they wanted to be going into a race. You're never where you want to be, even if you are. I felt like maybe my run could have been a little more established, a little more, I guess, run for durability, more runs, more consistent runs. But pretty close to right where I thought I was and where I wanted to be.
Okay. How could Ironman have made your race experience at this race better?
Off the top of my head, I don't really think of anything. It was a pretty good race from a logistics standpoint, from the volunteers, which are always awesome. I mean, they had probably hundreds of volunteers at each aid station. I mean, you went to an aid station, it was crazy how many people were there. There was no real question ever on any part of the course, like, where do I go here? It was always well directed. I think they nailed it. It was an overall really, really good, really well run race logistically and from a personnel standpoint too.
Wow. So logistically for you, was this a challenging race to do?
Not really. It's like an 8-hour drive, which is always one thing we look at. Not that Florida is easy to get to either, but that's kind of our other home race that we do. Like this will be my third time doing Florida in November. Getting to this race was easy to drive to. I think being a block and a half from the finish line, from transition, everything, staying at the hotel made it real convenient. We basically parked the car for 3 days and didn't have to use anything with it. Didn't have to drive anywhere. Walking around the city is awesome. It's easy. There's never any time where you're worried or wondering what to do, where to go. There's a bunch of stuff to do for the spectators. Overall, logistic wise, it was a pretty easy experience.
Okay. Now, what's something that you learned about this race experience that you want to pass on to someone else who hasn't done this race before?
It's an awesome experience. The atmosphere. Like I said, I've only done Florida as another venue. The experience in Wisconsin, I would say, it blows it out of the water from a spectator's atmosphere. I mean, it's a college town, so the kids are out partying on the run course, and State Street was nuts. Getting there is easy. Getting into town is easy. Everything on race day, there's support everywhere on the course. Just have fun with it, kind of thing. It's one of those things where you get out there and there's always something. It's not a boring course. You know, some people say the flatter courses are boring. There's a different challenge. I would say there's nothing in particular that is challenging from a logistics or from an experience standpoint on that day.
Okay. Now, we covered quite a bit about your race. Do you have anything else you want to add?
I think we pretty much covered everything with it.
Okay. So I know you're doing Florida and you have a half marathon next. I just want to invite you back on after Florida. If you want to come back on, be glad to have you back on.
Sounds good. We can do that.
Awesome. So to kind of conclude, I always ask a few random questions to wrap everything up. What races are on your bucket list?
So like I said, we got Florida again this year. Next year, Ironman hasn't officially announced it, but there's the half that's supposed to be up in Traverse City. That is getting a huge Michigan, Detroit area following. I mean, our Team Fraser, I think we've got like 30 or 40 people that have said they're going. There's another big triathlon group, Infinite Multisport, in the area. I do a lot of work with them being out of the shop. I think they've got like 100 or 150 going up to that race. That will be a race that once it's officially announced will sell out. So we're doing that one for sure. And then next year I'm going back to Florida again. So that's already kind of set. Obviously registration isn't open for 8 weeks until this race ends, but going back there. I mean, you hear everything about like the Mont Tremblant. That's an eventual, want to go do that one. Been talking with one of my buddies and he wants to race Frankfurt in a couple of years. Which that would be a fun day. It's a fairly flat rolling course, which suits me better than a hillier course. That's
nuts.
Yeah. So we'll see. Nothing that I have to go do. I said I wasn't going to be doing a full next year, and now I'm already planning on Florida, and I wasn't going to do 2 this year, and I'm doing what I did Wisconsin and doing Florida. And so I'm pretty easily persuaded into signing up for a race. So we'll just kind of see what comes along, but Florida is a good one for us to go to. My grandparents have condos there. They've had them there since 15 years before Ironman was even there. So it's convenient for us. As a shop, we pull our trailer down there. We're taking like 30 bikes with us for our athletes. So that one's usually the go-to for the year, but I'm going to start mixing in some other races over the next few years. Mont Tremblant sounds like a fun one. I know Placid's the one that everyone says you have to do. So we'll see.
Okay. Well, how can athletes follow you?
Instagram. I'm pretty, I do a lot on social media, especially being from a bike shop background. I post pretty much every workout, every bike we do and build in the shop, everything that we're doing. Can follow me there. Facebook, anybody can add me. Those are mainly the 2 I'm on. Obnoxiously posting all the time. So can follow me there.
Wow. Well, Taylor, it's been great hearing about your story about this race. And to conclude this episode, the last question is always the best question, and that's, what's your definition of a perfect race?
Having fun and executing the plan that you set in, because there's no one perfect race other than obviously winning everything, but 99.99% of us are never going to achieve that. So I think the big thing is go out, do it, but have fun with it. That's what a lot of us forget about. We go out and we try to hammer out the whole time and look mad and upset and are mad when something doesn't go right. But it's just another day. It's a long training day. It's a big party with 2,500 of your closest friends. So have fun and enjoy it and soak in the moment.
Wow, that's great. Well, Taylor, thank you so much for sharing everything. I've enjoyed hearing about it, and I look forward to talking with you about Ironman Florida in the future.
Thanks for having me on, Terry.
Oh, you're welcome. Have a good day, and we'll talk soon, okay?
Sounds good. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in today. I hope you were able to learn something from today's episode. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to leave a review on iTunes or share it with a friend. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you'd like to see pictures from this athlete's race, learn more about who I am, what I'm doing, or be on the show yourself to share your story, check out my website at CoachTerryWilson.com. Until next time, continue the pursuit.